Hi everyone, it is Candice here from Hey Sweet Art. The following tutorial is the slice of summer from our 2025 project pack. The following tutorial falls part of the projects included in my 2025 Annual Watercolour Project Pack, a beautiful pack that includes 10 full color references as well as pre-templated projects onto 100% cotton Fabriano Artistico soft press paper. This is a really good quality watercolor paper, and the physical packs are still available to purchase in South Africa on www.heysweet.art, and you can purchase the digital version of these packs via my Patreon platform, www.patreon.com/heysweetart. I'm just going to open up to the reference page in our reference booklet and then just find the template sheet. And I'm going to start preparing the colors first. I'm using the Daniel Smith range of watercolors, and I've listed the colors alongside. I will just chat through where I've mixed certain colors together, and ultimately you can use what you have. So if you do not have these exact colors or the Daniel Smith watercolor specifically, use whatever watercolors you have and just find reasonable alternatives. So my first color that I've mixed up is just a Sap Green by itself. Actually I have added a bit of rich green gold to give it more of like a yellowy tinge. And then I've mixed a Undersea Green with a little bit of Sap Green, but it's mostly the Undersea Green. And lastly a dark version of that with the Undersea Green. Eventually, as we do paint for the darker shadows, I add Perylene Green into that mixture. This is a little bit sped up, so feel free to slow it down or push pause when you get to the painting portion. For my watermelon fleshy pink colors, I've used Quinacridone Coral and Quinacridone Red together to give me a lovely sort of watermelon pink. And then I mix a similar sort of batch but add to that Alizarin Crimson for a slightly darker mixture. And then ultimately have a much deeper value of that with more of the Alizarin Crimson mixed in for later. To start off, we are going to be working in the pink section of the watercolor. This is because it's the largest sort of area and we need to let layers dry. There's a lot of that letting layers dry beforehand. So I've watered down my mixture of the Quinacridone Coral and Quinacridone Red together. And I'm going in with my first mixture being quite diluted, but I'm also going to pick up some water when I approach the bottom. And I'm going to use this as my base layer to work in a wet on wet technique. I'm using a mop brush for this. This is the Comb French Aqua, and this just allows me to lay down a lot of liquid at a time. You can see that my wash layer is quite light, and I will pick up a bit of water just to further dilute that pigment as I approach the bottom of that watermelon. So you can't really see, but the surface right from the point of the watermelon down to the edge of the skin is all moist. I've just obviously kept it light as it approaches the skin at the bottom. And now I'm going to start laying in my dark values and plotting in some of those shadows. So there's a sort of rim highlight on the left hand side, which I'm going to leave intact. There's just the soft diffusion within that paint, and I'm going to progress obviously from left onto the right hand side, where towards that edge, that line is nice and sharp and of a darker value than what is on the left hand side. It's good to go slowly, so if I'm not progressing quickly enough, it's more because I'd rather just let things build up slowly. I'm now starting to bring in the darker contrast, but you'll see I'm not rushing the process. I'm just building up gently, and if I need to re-wet certain areas that have started to dry, I'll just pick up a bit of water on my brush and lead pigment into that space by re-wetting that surface. Just to keep good control and have that bottom section always light but soft, I'll take my brush and just run through that area with clean water to lift any pigment that might start traveling in that direction, because I want the pink to sort of softly fade into the white. I don't want any hard edges, but if I don't have that control, it will continue to travel down, and then it won't leave that white line that we need for that part in the skin between the green and the pink. So I'm just using my mop brush now to wet the bottom, including the outer skin portion of the peel. And this is because I'm going to use a wet on wet technique where I'm going to dot along the inside skin line so that green sort of bleeds into the white fleshy bit. And then it doesn't matter if it does go into the skin at the bottom, because there we are going to paint over that with our stronger value greens anyway. So on the right hand side there is a bit of green that creeps up into the flesh and a little bit of the pink, so I've just incorporated that already. And now I'm just going to move along painting the skin section and letting it bleed into the fleshy bit. So sometimes a wet on wet technique can be a little bit out of control. You want to make sure when you're picking up your paint that you're not picking up too much. This is just a little bit at a time. And I also continually rinse off my brush, wipe off any excess liquid, and just run it through the wet surface to control. That is your control. So you use a dragging or a lifting technique just to remove any of those flyaway paint flows that might happen and that you don't want. If you are struggling with your big brush just to get good water control, you can switch to a smaller brush just to help deposit a little bit less. I'm using a smaller brush here just so that I can intensify along that inside skin line to give it a little bit more concentrated pigment. For easier access and so that you don't have your hand resting in wet paint, I sometimes will just flip my reference and my painting around so that I can work on a side that's a little bit more easy to access. So I'm now just going in and starting to work those deep values into the little pockets in the watermelon where the seeds live. So let's call them seed pockets. And I'm just starting to paint in those much darker values, giving the shadows. Again, I'm working with a small brush just to keep it controlled and not go in with a big blob of paint that I'm going to be unhappy with how it's laid down. I'm leaving a space in the ones where there are seeds because I'll come in later and paint those in with the dark Hematite Genuine. Before painting the seed pockets, you do want to make sure that the pink portion of your watermelon is, for the most part, completely dry. It's okay if there's some diffusion because we can come back and just repaint this area just to intensify those values again. But in order to have nice, crisp, clear, sharp lines, your paper does need to be dry in the areas that you want to paint. I've picked up a slightly bigger size round brush. This is a size 8. And I'm just painting in with clean water into areas where I want to intensify values, so make them a little bit darker. This first step is obviously just plotting in the water into those spaces, and then I will start picking up color and just dropping them into the water, because we always want to keep that sort of soft texture pulling through. For the seeds, I'm just going to use the quickest black that I can find. I'm using Hematite Genuine by Daniel Smith here, but you can really use any black. Just make sure when you are painting in those seeds, you leave that space for the white highlight. That being said, there is a section where we use our Gelly Roll Pen to come and bring back some of those white marks and highlights, but to make it easier on you and so that shines through a little bit more opaquely, best to keep what's on the surface level as light as possible as well. Just making a note that I have flipped my reference and my painting back to its normal orientation. I'm now going to use the mixture of Undersea Green and Sap Green, and this is to start painting in the hard outer skin of that peel. These final stages are more to bring in those final details. So to make it easier for me, there are sometimes a need for a watercolor pencil. And this is just so that I can mark out sections in my painting that I want to paint in a darker value, maybe, but maybe capture some details like the pattern of the different circles or whatever, the pattern that's on the skin of the watermelon. You all understand what I mean when you see what's happening. But basically, the reason why I'm using a watercolor pencil is so that there's no marks left behind, because the paper is going to be dry when I draw in with my watercolor pencil. When I come at it with paint, that green pigment from the watercolor pencil will just dissolve into the painting as well. And then there's no pencil lines. So I don't recommend using an HB pencil. You just want to make sure it's nice and sharp so that you can see the lines. I don't imagine that you would see these lines come through on the video so well. But basically, I'm having a look at the reference on the left-hand side, and I'm just plotting in some of those marks that I can see. I'm giving shape to the lighter things, and in my mind, I know I'm going to be painting what's outside that shape. So it's a slightly negative painting technique as well. So depending on the area that I'm painting in, over this lighter green area, I'm just going to use a little bit of my Sap Green mixture. with the rich green gold, and I'm applying that negative painting technique where I'm just going to paint around those lighter shapes with my darker value. And as you move towards the right hand side of the peel, obviously you would start using the darker green mixtures. So for my darkest green is where I've added that Perylene Green in, and you'll see as I approach the very dark bits, that's how I get that intensity, just to add that Perylene Green into the mix. For those final details in the watermelon, like the highlights around the seeds, and there's some sort of vein lines. This is where something like the Sakura Gelly Roll Pen in white is going to be your friend. So I have used it in a size 8 thickness, which I think is thick enough. And I'm just going to go around my watermelon and start bringing in some of those final highlight details and those vein line details in the flesh. For this too, I'm obviously having a look at my reference alongside, and I'm making sure just to try where I can mimic what I see in the reference picture, just so that it looks as organic as possible instead of trying to make up highlights and vein lines from the top of my head. And there we have it. Our first painting from the 2025 Annual Watercolour Project Pack is complete. And I would so love to see your version of the watercolor. So please do share with us on Instagram. Make sure to tag at heysweet.art. and share what you've created.